on her.
Olivia
What?
Williams smoothed out the crumpled $10 bill on her lap, her fingers shaking so hard she nearly tore the paper. Along with 4 sticky quarters and a handful of copper, it was her entire world. $11.40. That was the price of her dignity after 12 hours of dodging wandering hands and scrubbing dried syrup off linoleum. She stared at the final notice resting on the mall bench beside her. The red ink felt like a physical weight, pressing the air out of her lungs. Sunset. The motel manager had been clear: if the balance wasn't paid by the time the streetlights flickered on, her threadbare suitcase would be sitting on the sidewalk. But the universe wasn't done with her yet. Her old sedan, her only sanctuary, sat in the far corner of the parking lot, stone cold and dead. The mechanic's words from an hour ago still rang in her ears like a death knell: $800 for the alternator, honey. Take it or leave it. She had left it, walking into the mall just to feel the recycled warmth of the heater, her thin waitress uniform offering no protection against the draft. Olivia huddled into herself, her messy brown hair falling over a face marked by weeks of quiet exhaustion. She looked at her hands, red, raw, and smelling of industrial soap. Just 6 months ago, she was weeks away from her nursing degree. Now, she was a glitch in this palace of luxury, a shadow sitting by a marble fountain while women in $1,000 coats glided past her without a glance. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a jagged, demanding vibration. A text from the pharmacy: prescription ready for pickup. Total, $85. Then, the screen lit up with a photo of a smiling woman in a hospital bed. Her mother. Olivia drew in a jagged breath, forcing the stinging tears back. She couldn't afford to break down, she couldn't afford the luxury of a sob. She swiped the screen, her voice coming out in a fragile, practiced cheer. Hey, Mom. Yeah, the shift went great. Tips were huge tonight. Don't worry about a thing. I'm coming to see you soon. As she hung up, the lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the cold stone of the fountain, praying for the ground to simply open up and swallow her whole. That one, Daddy, a sharp, small voice cut through the mall's hum. The one with the sad eyes. She's the one I want. Don't forget to like and hit the subscribe button to support this channel. Also, let me know your thought about the story in the comment section. Olivia didn't move. She didn't even breathe. She kept her eyes pressed shut, convinced that if she opened them, the voice would vanish, replaced by a security guard telling her to move along. But the silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that only follows the arrival of someone who owns the air everyone else breathes. Lily, don't be absurd, a man's voice vibrated through the air. It wasn't loud, but it was absolute, sharp and cold as a winter morning in a glass-paned office. We are here for your birthday dinner, not to pick up strays. The word stray stung more than the cold stone of the fountain. Olivia's eyes snapped open. Standing 5 feet away was a vision of clinical perfection. Liam Thunder looked exactly like his name, dark, imposing, and crackling with a dangerous energy. His charcoal suit was tailored to a degree that made Olivia feel like she was made of rags. Beside him, clutching a stuffed rabbit that probably cost more than Olivia's car, was the little girl. Lily wasn't smiling, her face was set in a stubborn, grumpy pout that mirrored her father's, but her eyes were fixed on Olivia with a terrifying intensity. I'm not being absurd, Daddy, Lily said, her small finger still leveled at Olivia's chest. She smells like cookies and she looks like she's about to cry. You said I could have anything for my birthday. I want her. I want a mommy who stays. Liam's gaze finally drifted down to Olivia. He looked at her stained uniform, the frayed hem of her coat, and finally, the eviction notice clutched in her hand. His lip curled, not in disgust, but in a calculated assessment. He wasn't looking at a person, he was looking at a transaction. He stepped forward, the click of his polished shoes echoing on the marble. He stopped just inches from Olivia, looming over her, a wall of expensive cologne and intimidation. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, extracting a black card with a flick of his wrist. "How much?" he asked. His voice was a low, melodic threat. Olivia blinked, her voice caught in her throat. I'm sorry. "For your time," Liam said, his eyes never leaving hers. "My daughter has a habit of getting what she wants, and I have a habit of making her problems disappear. You look like a woman with a great many problems. How much for 1 month of your life? How much to play the part of the mother she thinks she's found?" He leaned in closer, his shadow swallowing her completely. "Whatever your price is, I'll double it. But you don't talk, you don't ask questions, and you don't dare think this is real. You are a service I am buying to keep her quiet. Do we have a deal, Olivia?" She froze. He knew her name. He must have read the tag on her uniform, but the way he said it made her feel like he already owned her. She looked at the red ink on her eviction notice, then back at the little girl's pleading eyes. The streetlights outside were beginning to flicker on. The sunset was over. "I don't have a choice, do I?" she whispered. Liam's smile didn't reach his eyes. "In my world, Olivia, no one truly does." The black SUV glided through wrought iron gates that looked more like the entrance to a fortress than a home. Olivia sat pressed against the leather door, her dirty uniform a jarring blemish against the pristine interior. Outside, the world was a blur of manicured lawns and stone statues, but as the glass castle came into view, her breath hitched. The Thunder Mansion was a masterpiece of steel and floor-to-ceiling windows, glowing like a cold diamond against the gathering dusk. It was beautiful, but as she stepped into the foyer, the air felt thin, devoid of the warmth of a lived-in home. Liam didn't linger to show her around. With a curt nod to a housekeeper in a crisp uniform, he handed over Olivia's meager belongings as if they were hazardous waste. "Clean her up," he commanded, his voice echoing off the vaulted marble ceilings. "And ensure she is ready for dinner in an hour. Lily doesn't like to wait." Without a second glance, he disappeared into a wing of the house that felt as silent as a tomb. Olivia was led up a winding staircase to a suite that was larger than her entire motel room. But it wasn't the luxury that caught her eye, it was the silence. As she passed a partially open door, she saw Lily. The grumpy little girl was sitting in the center of a room overflowing with every toy imaginable, dollhouses that reached the ceiling, life-sized bears, and a closet full of silk. Yet, Lily wasn't playing. She was staring out a massive window at the distant city lights, her small shoulders slumped in a way that mirrored Olivia's own exhaustion. The child's room was a museum of expensive things, but there were no finger paintings on the walls, no scattered blocks, no laughter. It was a gold-leafed cage. When Lily turned and saw Olivia standing in the doorway, the girl's defensive pout didn't immediately vanish, but her eyes searched Olivia's with a desperate, hungry intensity. "You didn't run away," Lily whispered, her voice tiny in the vastness of the room. "I gave my word, Lily," Olivia replied softly, stepping onto the plush carpet. She realized then that Liam Thunder hadn't just bought a mommy to keep his daughter quiet, he had bought a distraction for a child who was drowning in a sea of lonely luxury. Lily walked over and tentatively reached out, her small hand brushing the sleeve of Olivia's worn coat. "Daddy says everyone leaves eventually because they have better things to do. Are you going to have better things to do?" The raw honesty in the child's voice broke through the last of Olivia's professional guard. She looked around at the cold, perfect glass walls of the mansion. Liam Thunder had all the money in the world, but his daughter was just as spiritually bankrupt as Olivia was financially. For the first time since the mall, Olivia didn't feel like a victim of a transaction. She felt a surge of protective fire. "Not tonight, Lily," Olivia promised, kneeling so she was at the girl's level. "Tonight, there is nowhere else I'd rather be." Lily didn't smile yet, she didn't seem to know how, but she let out a small, shaky breath and leaned her forehead against Olivia's shoulder. In that moment, the glass castle felt a little less like a fortress and a little more like a home, even if the man who built it was still made of ice. The following evening, the silence of the Thunder Mansion was broken not by a scream or a crash, but by a scent. Liam Thunder was descending the glass staircase, his mind occupied by a failing merger, when the aroma of toasted butter and melting cheese pulled him toward the kitchen. He stopped at the threshold, his breath hitching. The state-of-the-art kitchen, usually a sterile gallery of stainless steel and marble, was a battlefield of crumbs and steam. Olivia was standing at the industrial stove, her hair, now clean and chestnut-bright, falling in loose waves over a borrowed sweater. She wasn't using the imported truffles or the $200 an ounce saffron. Instead, she had a loaf of simple white bread and a block of cheddar she'd begged from the bewildered chef. "It's all about the crust, Lily," Olivia said, her voice warm and melodic, a stark contrast to the hollow echoes of the house. "You have to press it down just enough so it sizzles, but not so much that it loses its soul." Lily was perched on a high stool, her $400 dress protected by a dish towel tucked into her collar. For the first time, the girl wasn't scowling. Her eyes were wide, tracking the spatula with the intensity of a scientist. "Is that why the ones the cook makes are bad? Because they have no soul?" "Maybe they just have too many rules," Olivia laughed, a light, genuine sound that seemed to bounce off the cold glass walls and soften them. She flipped the sandwich, revealing a perfect, shattered gold crunch. Liam watched from the shadows of the hallway. He had spent millions on therapists, elite nannies, and the finest toys in the world to make his daughter happy, yet he had never seen her lean forward with such pure, unadulterated interest. Olivia sliced the sandwich into triangles, "The only way they taste like magic," she claimed, and slid the plate toward the girl. Lily took a bite. The crunch was audible in the quiet room. A slow, tentative curve began at the corners of Lily's mouth. It wasn't a practiced social smile, it was a breakthrough. It was the sun coming out behind a decade of clouds. "It's hot," Lily whispered, her eyes shining as she looked up at Olivia. "And it's good, Mommy." The word hit the room like a physical force. Liam stepped into the light, his face a mask of shocked stone. He looked at the greasy plate, then at the flour smudge on Olivia's cheek, and finally at his daughter's radiant face. "I didn't authorize a mess in the kitchen," Liam said, though the bite in his voice was missing. Olivia didn't flinch. She picked up a second sandwich and held it out to him, her gaze steady and unafraid. "The mess is where the life is, Mr. Thunder. And I think your daughter was starving for something that wasn't served on silver." Liam looked at the simple, buttery bread, then at the woman who had managed to do in 24 hours what he hadn't achieved in years. For a split second, the Iceman melted. He reached out, his fingers brushing hers as he took the sandwich, and for the first time, he didn't see a transaction. He saw a miracle. The following morning, the warmth of the kitchen was replaced by the clinical chill of Liam's private study. The room was a monument to glass and shadow, dominated by a desk of polished obsidian that looked more like an altar than a piece of furniture. Liam sat behind it, his silhouette framed by the sprawling skyline of the city he helped build. He didn't look at Olivia as she entered, he was focused on a thick stack of papers held together by a heavy silver clip. "Sit," he commanded, the softness from the previous night's grilled cheese dinner nowhere to be found. Olivia sat, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had traded her stained uniform for a simple, high-collar dress the staff had provided, but she still felt like an intruder in this room of cold power. Liam slid the papers across the desk. "This is the formalization of our arrangement. My legal team has drafted it to ensure there are no misunderstandings." Olivia looked down at the header, Limited-Term Domestic Partnership and Child Development Agreement. The words felt like lead. She flipped through pages of clauses regarding confidentiality, non-disclosure, and behavioral expectations. "Section 4 is the most critical," Liam said, leaning forward into the light. The morning sun caught the sharpness of his jaw, making him look like a statue carved from flint. "Rule number 1, no feelings. You are here to provide a psychological service for my daughter. You will be warm to her, you will be present for her, and you will act as the mother figure she has requested. But you must remember at all times that this is a performance. He tapped a finger on the desk, the sound like a gavel. Rule number 2, no drama. Your past, the motels, the debts, the failures, stays outside these gates. If a single headline appears connecting your previous life to this house, the contract is void and you are back on that mall bench within the hour. Olivia felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. And rule number 3? Rule number 3 is for me, Liam replied, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous velvet. I do not want a wife, Olivia. I do not want a partner. I am hiring a stabilizer for Lily. Do not mistake my daughter's affection for an invitation into my life. When the month is up, or when she grows bored of the novelty, you will receive a severance that will ensure you never have to work in a diner again. But until then, you are an employee. Nothing more. The coldness of his delivery was a physical blow. He was offering her a fortune to be a ghost in a beautiful home, to love a child he couldn't reach while remaining invisible to him. Olivia picked up the heavy fountain pen. She thought of her mother's hospital bills and the $11.40 in her pocket. She thought of Lily's rare, bright smile. She signed her name in a firm, elegant script that surprised even Liam. I can play a part, Mr. Thunder, she said, sliding the contract back. But you should know, you can't contract the Hart. Not yours, and certainly not your daughter's. Liam didn't answer. He simply gathered the papers, his expression as unreadable as the glass walls surrounding them, as the first cracks in his carefully constructed world began to widen. The following week, a heavy silence fell over the Thunder estate as a nor'easter battered the glass walls with relentless sleet. Inside, the atmosphere was equally strained. Liam was walking toward the dining hall, his mind a chaotic ledger of falling stocks and aggressive acquisitions, when the sound of hushed, panicked weeping stopped him in his tracks. He rounded the corner of the west wing to find Maria, one of the youngest housekeepers, trembling near a shattered porcelain vase, a Ming Dynasty relic that cost more than a suburban home. Beside her, Olivia wasn't standing in judgment or summoning the head of staff. She was on her knees in the debris, her hands carefully gathering the jagged blue and white shards. It's okay, Maria. Take a breath, Olivia said, her voice a low, steady anchor in the girl's storm of panic. Mr. Thunder, he'll fire me, Maria sobbed, her hands pressed to her mouth. I need this job. My grandmother's medicine. He isn't going to fire you, Olivia interrupted gently. She reached out, taking the girl's shaking hands in her own, ignoring the way a small splinter of porcelain pricked her thumb. It was an accident. The floor was freshly waxed. I'll tell him I moved it. I'll tell him it was my clumsy, commoner, hands. Liam froze in the shadows, his pulse quickening. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who would step over a falling body to climb a rung higher. He lived in a world where mistakes were met with litigation and weakness was exploited. Yet here was Olivia, a woman who had been humiliated by his own contract just days ago, risking her only source of security to shield a girl she barely knew. He watched as Olivia stood up, guiding the younger girl toward the kitchen with a comforting arm around her shoulders. As she turned, the hallway light caught the small bead of blood on Olivia's thumb and the weary, yet fierce kindness in her eyes. It was a look he hadn't seen directed at anyone in years, certainly not at him. For the first time, Liam didn't see the hired help or a social experiment for his daughter. He saw a woman whose spirit was far more expensive than anything in his vault. A strange, uncomfortable warmth flared in his chest, a sensation so foreign it felt like a threat. He stayed in the shadows long after they had gone, his hand resting on the cold glass wall, realizing that the most dangerous thing in his house wasn't a corporate spy or a rival, it was the heart of the woman he had tried so hard to dismiss. The ice hadn't just cracked, it was beginning to bleed. The piece of the Thunder estate was a fragile glass ornament, and it shattered on a humid Tuesday afternoon. Olivia was in the garden with Lily, teaching her how to plant marigolds in a small patch of dirt they had claimed from the pristine, manicured landscape. For a moment, with her hands caked in earth and Lily's laughter ringing out, Olivia had forgotten the shadow of the $11.40 life she had left behind. That was until the head of security approached with a grim expression, holding a cell phone. "There's a man at the gate, Miss Williams. He claims to be your uncle. He's making a scene." Olivia's blood turned to slush. She knew exactly who it was, Uncle Silas. The man who had sold her mother's jewelry while she was in the hospital and left Olivia with a mountain of his gambling debts before vanishing. She stood up, wiping her hands on her apron, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She met him at the edge of the long, winding driveway, away from Lily's curious eyes. Silas looked like a vulture in a cheap suit, his eyes yellowed and hungry as they swept over the sprawling mansion behind her. Well, Livy," he sneered, leaning against the iron bars. "I saw your face in a tabloid blur yesterday. I didn't believe it. My little niece, the gutter rat, living in the Thunder Palace. You've done well for yourself." "Leave, Silas," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't have any money for you. I'm just a nanny." "A nanny?" Silas laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "That's not what the papers are going to say when I tell them about your mother's unpaid medical bills and the debt collectors currently looking for you. I think Mr. Thunder would pay a high price to keep a homeless fraud away from his precious daughter." He stepped closer, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. 50,000, Livy. Or I go to the press with the true story of the gold digger who tricked a billionaire's child. You have 24 hours. Olivia watched him drive away in a rusted car that looked like a scar on the beautiful scenery. She felt the walls of the glass castle closing in. Liam's words from the contract echoed in her mind: "If a single headline appears connecting your previous life to this house, the contract is void." She turned to see Liam standing on the balcony above, his silhouette dark against the sun. He had been watching. He didn't say a word, but the coldness of his gaze told her that the no drama clause was being tested. The past wasn't just a ghost, it was a predator, and it had finally caught the scent of her new life. She wasn't just fighting for a paycheck anymore, she was fighting to keep the only family she had left, the one she had been hired to pretend was hers. The grand winter gala was a sea of shimmering silk and razor-sharp judgment. Olivia felt like a lamb led to a den of wolves, her skin itching under the fine lace of the gown Lily had insisted she wear. She stayed close to the shadows, her hand resting protectively on Lily's shoulder, but she could feel the eyes of the city's elite boring into her. They didn't see a mother, they saw a scandal waiting to break. The trap was sprung near the champagne fountain. Juliana Vance, a woman whose blood ran as cold as the diamonds around her neck, stepped forward, flanked by a small swarm of reporters. She held a tablet aloft like a weapon, the screen glowing with a grainy, leaked photo of Olivia sitting on the mall bench, disheveled and desperate. "Liam, darling," Juliana purred, her voice carrying across the ballroom and silencing the orchestra. "We were all so charmed by your new companion. But I find myself confused. This woman was a homeless waitress exactly 10 days ago. Is this a charity project, or have you finally lost your mind? The people deserve to know if the mother of the Thunder Empire is just a common fraud with an empty bank account." The cameras flashed, a blinding strobe of predatory light. Olivia felt the familiar weight of shame beginning to crush her. She looked down at Lily, whose small face had gone pale with fear, and then at the exit. She was ready to run, to return to the cold streets where she belonged, rather than face this public flaying. But then, a hand, warm, solid, and immovable, settled on the small of her back. Liam Thunder stepped into the center of the circle. He didn't look at the cameras, he looked directly at Juliana with a contempt so profound it made her flinch. "You're right, Juliana," Liam said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that commanded the room. Olivia was sitting on that bench. She had nothing. And yet, she was the only person in this city with enough heart to give my daughter the one thing my billions couldn't buy: genuine love. He turned to the reporters, his gaze like liquid steel. You call her a fraud because she was poor. I call her the most honest person in this room. Every one of you has a price. Every one of you is wearing a mask. Olivia Williams is the woman who saved my family when the rest of you were too busy counting your stock options to notice we were drowning. He stepped closer to Olivia, pulling her and Lily into his protective orbit. She isn't a charity project. She is the heart of this home. And if any of you ever attempt to use her past to hurt my daughter again, I will ensure your names are erased from this city by morning. The silence that followed was absolute. Liam didn't wait for a rebuttal. He turned his back on the vultures, guiding Olivia and Lily toward the terrace. For the first time, as the cool night air hit her face, Olivia didn't feel like a hired ghost. She looked up at Liam, seeing the fire in his eyes, and realized that the Iceman hadn't just defended an employee, he had declared war for the woman he was no longer pretending to love. The aftermath of the gala didn't bring the peace Olivia expected, it brought a terrifying clarity. As she stood in the center of her sprawling guest suite, the echo of Liam's voice defending her rang louder than the accusations of the high society vultures. He hadn't just protected an employee, he had looked at her with a raw, searing intensity that made her heart race for all the wrong reasons. The contract was clear, no feelings. But the way he had held her, the way he had claimed her as the heart of his home, was a boundary crossed that she couldn't ignore. Fear, cold and familiar, clawed at her throat. She was a girl from the streets, a woman with a broken car and a mother in a hospital bed. This life of glass and silk was a beautiful lie, and the higher she climbed, the farther she would have to fall when that novelty wore off. She couldn't let Lily love her anymore, and she certainly couldn't let herself love Liam. With trembling hands, Olivia packed her old, threadbare bag. She left the lace gown on the bed like a shed skin and placed the black card Liam had given her on the nightstand. She didn't want the severance, she wanted to disappear before the heartbreak became permanent. She slipped out of the mansion under the cover of a gray, drizzling dawn, her chest aching with every step she took away from the gates. But she didn't even make it to the bus station. Her phone erupted with a frantic, distorted ringing. It was the head housekeeper, her voice thick with panic. "Olivia, you have to come back. It's Lily. She woke up screaming for you, and now she's burning up. The doctor says it's a stress-induced fever, but she won't let anyone touch her. She's calling for her mommy, Olivia. She thinks you left because she was bad." The bag slipped from Olivia's hand, hitting the wet pavement with a dull thud. The hyper-independence that had been her shield for years shattered in an instant. She didn't care about the contract, the vultures, or the impossibility of a billionaire loving a waitress. All she saw was the image of a lonely, grumpy little girl sitting in a room full of toys, waiting for the only person who had ever made her a grilled cheese sandwich with soul. She flagged down a taxi, her voice cracking as she gave the address of the glass castle. When she burst through the front doors, she found Liam in the hallway, his face a mask of absolute devastation and fury. He looked like a man who had lost everything twice over. But the moment his eyes met hers, the anger vanished, replaced by a desperate, shattering relief. "She won't stop crying for you," Liam whispered, his voice broken. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face as if to check if she was real. "I told you that you were a service, Olivia. I was wrong. You're the heir in this house. Please, don't ever leave us again." Olivia didn't answer with words. She ran past him, up the winding stairs to the room where a small, feverish girl was waiting for the only miracle that mattered. The runaway was gone, the mother had returned. The fever finally broke at dawn, leaving the mansion in a heavy, exhausted hush. Lily was asleep, her small hand still curled tightly around Olivia's pinky finger. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes burning from the overnight vigil, watching the soft rise and fall of the child's chest. The fear that had driven her to run was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable clarity. She belonged here, not because of a paycheck or a signed piece of paper, but because this little girl was the first person in years who had made her feel like she wasn't invisible. A soft sound at the door made her turn. Liam was standing there, his tie gone, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. The Iceman looked human, fragile, and entirely undone. He gestured toward the hallway, his eyes never leaving Olivia's. When they reached the landing, the morning sun was just beginning to hit the glass walls, turning the cold fortress into a cathedral of light. Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out the thick stack of papers they had signed in his study. The contract. You left this behind, Liam said, his voice low and gravelly. I didn't want the money, Liam, Olivia whispered, her voice cracking. I just couldn't handle the lie anymore. Pretending to be part of something that wasn't mine, it was breaking me. Liam looked down at the document, his thumb tracing the "no feelings" clause. Then, without a word, he gripped the edges of the papers and tore them down the middle. He tore them again and again until the legal demands were nothing but a handful of white confetti. Then let's stop lying, Liam said. He stepped toward her, closing the distance until the air between them hummed with the same intensity as the night of the gala. I hired you to be a stabilizer. I hired you to be a mother for my daughter because I thought I was empty enough to live with a ghost in my house. I was wrong. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek with a tenderness that made Olivia's breath hitch. His thumb brushed over the skin where the stress of the week had left its mark. Lily doesn't need a nanny anymore, Olivia. And I don't need an employee. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, his voice a raw confession. I need the woman who makes grilled cheese in my kitchen. I need the woman who stands up to the vultures. I want you to stay, not for Lily's sake, but for mine. I don't want a contract. I want a wife. Olivia looked into the eyes of the man who had once terrified her, finding a warmth there that no billionaire's wealth could buy. She realized then that the $11.40 life was finally over. The miracle hadn't been the money or the mansion, it was the fact that three broken people had found each other in the middle of a storm and decided to become a son. She leaned into his touch, a soft smile finally breaking across her face. I think the grilled cheese might have worked on you too, she whispered. Liam laughed, a real, vibrant sound that filled the glass castle with life, and pulled her into a kiss that finally made them a family.